All right. Welcome to the Cloud Accounting Podcast. This is a special interview with Ken Bishop, the president and CEO of NASBA, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. Welcome to the program, Ken.
Blake, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. We have been talking a lot on the program about the 150-hour rule. We recently did an interview with Jimmy Corley, who is the executive director of the State Board of Accountancy in Arkansas. And so we're really eager to talk to you in your role as the president of NASBA, because we've been following everything that's been going on from the outside, and now we get to talk to you. You have probably the best view of what's going on. So eager to talk to you about the talent shortage and the 150-hour rule. I guess maybe we should start with that vote that NASBA's board took on what Minnesota is doing with the 150-hour rule. So Minnesota's got legislation in their legislature, a bill to create an alternative pathway that would allow future CPAs to earn 120 hours, the regular 4-year college degree, and then 2 years of work experience instead of going and getting that extra 30 hours. And NASBA voted unanimously to oppose that. So can you give us some context on that? Because what we're hearing from the community of CPAs, and then also folks in the state boards and in the societies, is that like they are not unanimous. There's a lot of opposition to the 150-hour rule. So, can you explain the difference here?
Sure. Well, first of all, we didn't have the vote that the NASBA board had was not directly related to the Minnesota legislation. So we didn't vote against Minnesota's bill. Essentially, the requirements, for licensure and certification aren't determined by NASBA. They're determined by state legislators, and ultimately, they're enforced or implemented by the state boards of accountancy. NASBA's role as a board of directors is they review and essentially approve language for exposure, language that comes out of the Uniform Accountancy Act, which is a joint committee between NASBA and AICPA. So it was that forum, the Uniform Accountancy Act, and both the NASBA and AICPA board that had originally endorsed moving to 150, many years ago, back in the late 70s and 90s or 80s is when that bill took place. So essentially the vote was to continue to support the 150 because of the importance of substantial equivalency and mobility across the United States. And also believing it's the right benchmark for education to be a CPA in this day and time.
So David, I think you have a question.
I guess just this ties back to a bigger question we had, like the relationship between the AICPA and NASBA. So when you say this Uniform Accountancy Act, is this like, when you say act like this is a bill of Congress and it was passed as a law, or is it act as like, this is a committee name we created and we use the word act? Can you talk to that in the relationship?
Sure. The Uniform Accountancy Act, the concept was developed again in the really early 80s. And it was the effort it was way before the thoughts about mobility. It was an effort to make the laws more uniform as far as the regulation of accounting across the United States. So they knew there had to be a balance between regulators and the profession. So the UA committee is a joint committee. Each NASBA and AICPA have a UA committee, but it's a joint committee that combines to determine statute language that we recommend for uniformity. And again, it's a recommendation. The Uniform Accountancy Act is exposed to everyone, to the profession, to state boards, to state societies, to educators, to consumers of accounting services that are interested. And then they get to provide feedback, which goes back to the UA committee. Ultimately, they develop the language, and that before it goes out or goes into the UA, it then has to be approved again by the NASBA board and the AICPA board. So essentially, it's not law, it's recommended law that almost every state and territory adopts, not verbatim, but almost every single state board and territory in the United States is very close to the UAA.
Got it. So it's almost like a template. You wrote it up, or not you, but it was written up. The UA writes up with their committee, writes it up, and they highly recommend the states follow it. And then obviously some states have, just like with any templates, people tweak 1 or 2 lines here and there, but essentially that's where it's at. That's
a correct
is this vote, what drove this vote? Like, were there some people that said, hey, we should reconsider this? Should we change it? Like what?
It probably had as much to do with me as anything, and our chair, Rick Reisig. We have, like every board, we have rollover and turnover. And so this year we have quite a few new members. And so consistently through the years, I mean, I've been the CEO now for like 12 years, and there's always been very consistent support for the 120. But I like to know the temperature of the board, new people on the board, whether there's a change in mindset or a lessening of support for it. So really it was more of determining, is our board still solidly behind, the current language of the Uniform Accountancy Act, and it was.
Got it. That makes sense.
So there have been numbers reported in the Wall Street Journal, Accounting Today, about the accounting talent shortage. 17% of US auditors and accountants quit the profession in the last few years. There is a shortage of accounting talent in small firms, in large firms, everywhere, in corporations. There's strong continued demand for accountants, and we can't get enough of them. Meanwhile, accounting program enrollments are down in college. Fewer people are taking the CPA exam every year. Why keep this 150-hour rule when there's no evidence that it increases CPA quality? I've never seen any evidence that anyone's better off because of the 5th-year rule. In fact, there's studies that show the opposite, that it simply reduces the supply of accountants. I mean, this seems like something easy that we could change right away to solve this, or to help solve this talent crisis we've got.
For sure. And let me just start off by saying I disagree with several of the premises that you just said. First of all, I would agree with you. This has been around now for multiple decades, and there are some studies that, like what we look at, we know that the pass rate's gone up, for example, since all states adopted the 150 pretty significantly. So there's that's there. But I also want to say on the front end, we absolutely agree with you. There is a huge problem of this declining number of people entering the profession. And it's happening at the same time that baby boomers are retiring. People are leaving the profession. The great resignation that happened during COVID also impacted accounting staffs when couples decided one half the couple would stay home, lots of reasons. So we know it's a big problem. And, and we've been working on it. We've been trying to come up with strategies of things that we can do short-term, mid-term, and long-term to try to get more people in the profession. But on our side, we've been trying to do that without disrupting substantial equivalency and mobility, which really took decades to achieve and is very high value to CPAs and CPA firms. But more importantly, it's high value to clients. For example, I was in Missouri when I started my career. I live in Nashville, Tennessee now, but my CPA in Missouri still does my work, and it's a trusted CPA I've used for years, and mobility allows that to happen. So it's a value proposition to consumers and professionals that we're trying to maintain. And the counter argument to the evidence is there's absolutely no evidence that says that changing the education requirement to 150 would actually increase the number of people wanting to be CPAs right now, when the demographics are shrinking. There's less people going to college. A lot of competition with economists, MBA programs, lots of other programs. So I'm not saying it's not possible that that's one of the impacts, but I do know of all the surveys I've seen, out there, from minority groups, because there used to be an argument, maybe it was a detriment to minorities, the 150 hours, the Center for Audit Quality, the State Society of Illinois. There's been quite a few, surveys out there to try to find out what are the problems with people that are leaving the profession. And the cost of the examination, the amount of education never even makes the top of the list. It's always at the bottom part. The top of the list is always salaries, work-life balance.
But leaving the profession versus entering the profession.
Excuse me?
Leaving the profession versus entering are different. And this young
I'm talking about
generation
entering
is
the
very
profession the same
pragmatic.
way. They
Yeah.
interviewed candidates for the profession, and the candidates are the ones that did not list that as one of the primary or even a significant reason of why they're not wanting to enter the profession. In fact, when I talked to 2 accounting schools recently about candidates they lose, they said these people didn't leave and go into bachelor's programs. Most of them got MBAs. They went in to get master's degrees of economics. So the type of people like you, Blake, I heard you talk in one of your earlier, discussions with Jim that you talked about, that you had philosophy, as did he. I mean, there's a lot of people that were really made more whole. I mean, you're a great communicator. Jimmy Corley's a great communicator. And when I listened to your all's blog that day, I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, I never really thought about Jimmy Corley, but it might be that philosophy education that he got in addition to the accountants, what really took him over the top of being, what I know, the great communicator and the excellent executive director he's been in Arkansas. So evidence is sometimes subjective, but we do see a lot of gains with people who have the education, including you, Blake.
Right. But it's what you make of it. I just
Sure.
object to the idea of requiring people to go get it when we don't have, it's a significant cost, right? So I did some back of the envelope math, and I calculated that you might spend $100,000 here in Phoenix if you go get a master's, a MAC, over at ASU. You calculate the $30,000 in-state tuition, and then you add in the opportunity cost, and then the room and board and all that, and you're talking $100K, and that's not a small amount of money for a student. So I just find it hard to believe that the cost isn't something that people consider. Like if I'm a student and I can choose a 4-year degree that's going to pay me more than a 5-year program that's going to pay me less, what do I choose? Right?
Well,
Now,
I don't disagree with what you just said. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not saying that cost isn't an issue. I'm saying it is nowhere near the top of the range of the reasons people give.
What
I would else tell you also is those MAC programs traditionally, when you look at the output, when you see the people that go into the firms that are selected from the MAC programs, are selecting from the MAC programs, they do very well in salaries, as well. So
yeah.
But I would never argue against the fact that education has gotten extremely expensive, that more expensive. There's a very much of a concern about student loans by students now. So we know that's one of the challenges, but it's not, we don't see that as the biggest challenge.
So David and I have discussed this on the show, and it's hard to have a rational conversation about it without more information about these surveys. Unfortunately, AICPA doesn't release the data. I wonder who they're talking to. And David has said this very well on the show where, if you're talking to people who are already bought in to the whole path, right, doing the 5 years, doing the CPA, of course, for them, the cost is not going to be something that they say is a problem because they've already accepted that cost. But my question is, are NASBA and AICPA talking to the people who decided never to become accountants in the first place, right? That those people are not in that data set. And so if you don't survey them, all the people who are potential accounting students, you're missing out on this. To me, it just seems like obvious that, why would I go pay 25% more for a degree when I can do it in less time and be making even more money coming out of school? Like it just
you could say
doesn't
that
compute.
if you wanted to be a lawyer, you could say that if you wanted to be a doctor, you could say that if you want to be a clinical social worker, a tenured teacher. I mean, there are an awful lot of jobs out there that pretty much require a master's degree where we have the 150.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people will make a life decision as to what they want to do. That's why I think that the salaries is one of the big components we see now out in social media and in the surveys we've seen. Is because smart people become CPAs. So they are looking at the investment versus the ultimate, outcome that they have, the salary that they're going to get. So obviously it makes an impact.
Yeah.
On their decision.
We can't
But
control.
Let me go back to your other question.
Sure.
I can tell you practically, we don't have the ability in our data to survey people who decided not to go to college to be a CPA because they're not in our mix of people that we communicate with. But we do talk to the colleges. I've met with the with someone from a big college in Southern California yesterday, and had that discussion, and they too are down a significant percentage. So we know in reality there's a shrinking demographic, shrinking number of people going to college, and therefore less people becoming accountants. And that is why we're trying to come up with all the remedies. But we also believe there's a real good potential that lowering the bar of entry to become a CPA may actually be a detriment to people who want to be a professional versus, go into the accounting trade. So you guys, you can make your own determination, but you say you can't go out and find the surveys. I'm pretty sure that the Center for Audit Quality is out there. I know the University of the State Society of Illinois surveys out there. I think NABS is out there. So there's a lot of surveys out there in public domain that is very recent, that you can see how students did respond to that.
But there's a test. That's how we determine if somebody is qualified to be a certified public accountant. There's actually an exam, right?
Well, it's a three-legged stool. There's the exam, there's education, and there's experience. And so there are people who could take the exam and just pass the exam without ever going to school or having experience, but they wouldn't be qualified or ready to be a CPA.
So what we're talking about is adjusting that three-legged stool to allow for more experience in lieu of education. And everyone that I talk to, when I ask them this question, they say, I ask them the question, what do you think is more valuable to a young accountant? A year of experience or an extra year of education? 100%, it's a year of experience.
Well,
right.
And I don't disagree with that. I think that the experience that you get is good, but let's just look at experience and why they changed the law 40 years ago to the language of 150 versus the more extreme experience. When I first got into the regulation of accounting in the state of Missouri, the requirement was 2 years of experience, 2,000 hours per year in a CPA firm, supervised directly by a CPA that included X amount of hours of a test experience. That was the experience requirement. And even in those days, you could go to work for one firm and get great experience, and you could go to another firm and have relatively no experience, that the work that you were doing was not going to be valuable to your career as a CPA. So when you have a licensing requirement that says we'll accept 2 years of experience, like the Minnesota bill that you mentioned, one firm that might be highly valuable, the other that may be making copies or doing, when I talk to people that are earlier in their careers, there's a wide variety of differences of value and intensity of the experience. And the problem with that is in regulation and licensing, other states need to rely that there's consistency. And that is just always inconsistent. And
wait, Sir David, I gotta jump into this. So but there's the same problem in education, right? That extra 30 hours you get could be from the best Master of Accountancy program in the world, and it might just be awesome. And the other 30 hours could be in basket weaving, or it could be in philosophy. It could be anything, right? So it's the same problem. There's no guarantee that, that extra year of education is going to help you at all. And that's what we see in the data. The studies that have been done find that there's no difference in quality between CPAs who did the extra 30 and those who didn't. And 75% of the CPAs out there right now did 120 hours. Are we saying that they are less valuable than those who did 150?
No, as we just discussed, the 120 people that are out there, that huge percent of the population, most of them had very intense experience, that had included audit, directly supervised by a CPA, and that's not the case anymore. It's just experience that's verified. So it could be bookkeeping, it could be lots of things that would meet the bar that's entirely different than the bar of experience back when those 120 people became licensed in the past. And again, this isn't new. A lot of people are treating it like this 150 suddenly disrupted the supply chain of candidates. It's been around, like in Florida, they passed it in 1983.
August 3rd.
Many of those years, we had a surplus. We had a surplus of people. Accounting programs all over the country raised the bar of entry through ACT scores and entry scores and score averages to cut down on the size of classroom until just about 2000 and 18, something like that, just a little before pre-COVID. So all of a sudden we've had the anomaly of COVID. We've had this disruption of about student loans, a lot's going on, but there's really no indicator that the 150 is the cause of it. Because of that, before that, we had a surplus of candidates.
Oh, no, I agree that it's not the cause, but it's certainly one of the barriers to entry that is expensive, costs a
Well, as
billion.
we said earlier, that's any profession. The
Yeah.
cost of education, if you call it a barrier, it's a requirement of entry. Sure.
Right. But it's a barrier that, I would argue that law school has value and that medical school has value, but we have no evidence that the extra 30 hours has value. The studies that have been
we
done.
have no evidence. There's lots of evidence. I mean, I sit on the board at Vanderbilt University's MAC program, and literally, I think like 100% of the people get hired by big firms, and they talk about the level of competence these people have. And other schools have the same. University of Illinois and Champaign. I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out, but we also know that like I said, the pass rates on the exam have gone up since we had the 150-hour requirement. There's, like right now, there's less people going in the pipeline of examination, but there's more people coming out because of the higher pass rate. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence that 150 has improved overall the professionalism of the CPA profession. But there's also the outliers that we could all come up with. You said underwater basket weaving. That's what anyone who poses the 150 usually brings up.
Yeah.
But NASBA sees more transcripts than any other entity on the planet for the CPAs. And I can tell you, you rarely see a transcript of a person who's smart enough to become a CPA that doesn't have high value coursework in that 30 hours. And I would argue your philosophy courses that you had, Blake, were high value to be a better, more well-rounded and educated CPA.
Can NASBA publish that?
To be accounting courses.
Publish that. If you guys have all these transcripts, publish those records. That would help people to see this, right? What people are using for those 30 hours.
Yeah. What are they actually, what are their credits?
We're seeing this, we probably should do a better job of, and we are, this is a relatively new phenomenon, by the way. This new discussion about suddenly rolling back to 150 from 150 to 120 is relatively new. There's always been a group of people that oppose the 150 from the 1970s and 80s till now. But I can tell you that, we do know there's a couple state societies and maybe some board members, but there's not a single board of accountancy that has told us that they oppose 150, want to go to 120 and get rid of substantial equivalency or mobility. Certainly Arkansas, where Jimmy Corley, he's resigned now, but where Jimmy Corley was at Arkansas, the board only agreed to next year have a study to look at it. So they haven't opined against the 150 or going to 120. No state board has, and one state society has voted to do that.
So if we're not going to roll back 150 to 120 to make it less expensive, to make it less time consuming to become a CPA, what is the solution to this shortage that we have? It doesn't seem like natural causes are going to make more people go into accounting, right? And we've got this succession crisis in firms. Right? They can't find the candidates. They can't find the accountants, CPAs. If I'm a partner who's 50 or 60 and I need to pass on my firm to somebody and I can't get that young person in to take over, that's my retirement. I feel like that's probably why these state boards and these state societies are getting pressure. What's the, I have heard, ASCPA has their 8-point plan. I don't know if NASBA has a plan or if it's the same thing as the ASCPA one, but like none of those points on that plan I can quantify to make like a significant difference.
Sure. Well, significant difference. We need to make a difference, and we need to make a difference soon. Right now, we're looking at short range, mid range, and long range solutions that we can attract as many of the best and brightest that we can. We're looking at, you've probably heard of this Experience, Learn, and Earn program where people who dropped out to get a job during COVID, or before COVID, it's an opportunity for them to get back in and have low cost 30 hours of additional education. I say 30 hours, whatever they need to close the gap between when they graduated and 150 at a reasonable fee, and also be something that's important to that firm. So that's almost completely developed. We're going to launch it this fall.
So is that the program? I want to dig in more into that. So that's
Sure.
the program where you're working at a firm and you're taking college classes online, or?
It's a little deeper than that, and I'm not the subject matter expert. I have some great staff that are NASBA's contributors to that and working on that with our volunteers. But essentially, is that you're a firm, and like you just mentioned, these small firms are struggling to find someone, that is a CPA to hire them. So you have someone that is working for you that would like to achieve that, but the cost of the 30 hours is important. So this is an opportunity to get the 30 hours while you're working at the firm, and it could be online or not, but right now it's designed we're believing online at a cost that's no more expensive than like a typical 2-year college or junior college, no more than like $150 an hour. But the third element, which is critically important, is the firm can kind of say, this is the kind of education I'd like to see them get, to top off to be a better CPA for my size of firm. It might be focused on tax, it might be focused on something else. So it's an opportunity for a lot of employees of accounting firms who didn't top off with the 30 hours and could not become a CPA. It's an opportunity for them to get to a CPA at a relatively low cost and pretty efficiently, because the firm will support not only the money, help with the money, but also support by paying their salary and also giving them an opportunity to take this online or whatever type of coursework it is. So it's a pretty thought out, that's going to be rolled out pretty quickly. I think when you see it, you'll see that a lot of work has gone behind that particular study.
So the fact that there's a need for that program seems to indicate that the 30 hours is a barrier, like a significant barrier to obtaining the CPA.
Well, I would say the opposite. I think it clearly indicates that there's a need to provide a low cost option for people who want to top off and become CPAs. We're not suggesting that we lower the bar. It's actually, we want this to be very rigid, highly valued education that they achieve and become CPAs.
Well, I just want to dig into that lowering the bar phrase, because that's sort of like the corollary to the underwater basket weaving phrase, right? We use we joke about underwater basket weaving when we talk about the credits not being valuable, and then people defending the education say we don't want to lower the bar. But for a bar to exist, it should improve the quality. And again, as John said, who's watching on LinkedIn, we need to discuss systematic evidence and not anecdotes. And I know there are great programs out there that do train people to be better CPAs with the 5th year, but there is not any evidence other than anecdotally that I've heard that says that it makes them better overall. It simply reduces the supply. And so to me,
it's anecdotal evidence that people pass the CPA exam at a higher percentage with 150. I don't think it's anecdotal that a lot of the big firms have told us that the quality of candidates they're getting out of like MAC programs are excellent, and that's almost where all they were. So a lot of firms only hire from select schools that like MAC programs. So yeah, I think I can tell you that if I was on your side of this argument, I could probably come up with some ideas of there are always deviations from this, but the decision. Again, you're trying to imply that the 30 hours is the reason there's a drop off of candidates, and there actually is no evidence that indicates that. But it certainly, as you all mentioned, it could be that new people coming on, and that's what I talk about. We're also looking at middle ground long term. Is okay, what can we do? I saw recently a state board just passed a scholarship program. I mean, state boards are looking at different ways, but no one is saying that the remedy is, and again, I don't know that it's a negative comment, lowering a bar. I mean, if you want me to say lowering the education requirement, to me, that's the same thing. It's not meant to be, it's not mean to be mean-spirited or to challenge people. It's just, you see that in the Army, you see it in a lot of places where people talk about lowering the bar of entry. It means because you've lowered one of the requirements to get to a goal. So it's, not supposed to be that way.
Hold on. This is amazing. So we have John Barrios watching right now, and he was the one who commented on the systematic evidence. And this is the study that I keep talking about. He did a study, occupational licensing and accountant quality evidence from the 150-hour rule. And in the abstract to his study, He says, overall, these findings are consistent with the theoretical argument that increases in licensing requirements restrict the supply of entrants and do little to improve quality in the labor market. Labor market proxies for quality find no difference between the 150-hour rule CPAs and the rest. Moreover, rule CPAs exit public accounting at similar rates and have comparable writing quality to their non-rule counterparts. Right. So this is an actual, study, scientific study that was done on this. And I
can show you scientific studies that say a 180 from this study. So studies are, obviously, if you're going to argue an issue, you're going to pull up that study. If I wanted to pull up a study to argue my side of the issue, I saw recently, in fact, as our chair, Rick Reisig, has just written an article that'll be going out in some forums. But, what I am glad about, I am glad that both sides are looking at this, through a microscope, that we're really looking for solutions. My goal, and I'm not a CPA, so in some ways, ironically, somebody said, well, NASBA's just worried about the money. If I was worried about the money, I'd lower it down to an 8th grade education, because we make most of our money in facilitating the CPA examination. So keeping it at 150, using that argument, means it's a negative financial consequence for NASBA. But the reality is that I look back at the decades of leaders in AICPA and NASBA and state societies and state boards that work so hard to get all states and territories to be substantially equivalent and to get to mobility. And coming up with a reasonable alternative, that doesn't disrupt mobility, I think we're all willing to look at it. So I know that, we're looking at, is there an alternative pathway? You've probably heard of the New Jersey model. The reason we struggle a little with the New Jersey model is it's not one that's scalable, and it's probably not sustainable, because Price Waterhouse is paying the full freight of that small number of candidates going through St. Peter's. But we kind of like the concept. So we've got several solutions right now that we're working on, but we're not giving up on that. We're trying to come up with a solution that resolves as many of these issues as possible, but without disrupting substantial equivalency and mobility.
Right.
That is our goal. It's not to put a stake in the ground and say we can't change.
So Ken, stepping back from CPAs, right, and thinking about this as just accounting talent, so bookkeepers, EAs, tax preparers, virtual CFOs, right, the whole stack, FP&A guys, right? What is NASBA and AICPA doing to increase just the entire profession participation, right? More bodies, more labor, and because obviously it's easy to focus just on the CPAs and this 150-hour rule, but are you guys working together for these other parts of the profession on the whole?
Well, we're not, and I can only speak for NASBA. I mean, our job is NASBA is to enhance the effectiveness of state boards of accountancy, to provide the tools for determining licensure and readiness to sit for the CPA examination. We know there are a lot of quality accountants out there that do tax, enrolled agents and others, but we have absolutely no nexus at all to them, and we're not doing anything to encourage or discourage them. Our total focus is on getting more CPAs in, because we do know small firms are struggling to hire people. We have members of my board of accountancy are struggling to hire CPAs for their firm. They're spinning off work to other firms, so they absolutely know the problem. And so we know it's a problem, and it's not just for Minnesotans, it's for the entire country. And we are, but what I want to clear is that we aren't resting on our laurels. We are working on solutions, and we put a lot of brain power, money, and others behind it, capacity behind it, and we're coming out with some programs very, very quickly to address it.
But what programs? Like, what's going to really make a difference?
We're looking at ELE for that group. We're looking at starting to consider a pipeline for, or excuse me, a 30-hour, something like the New Jersey again, but that is scalable and also affordable. We're also looking at possibly an amnesty program where people who dropped out during COVID that lost parts of the exam, an opportunity for them to come back and maybe get those parts back if they re-enroll and set for the exam. We're just trying to think out the box and come out of all the solutions we can without disrupting, again, the mobility that took so many volunteers decades to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I have yet to hear of a program like here's my problem with AICPA's #1 program, right? This New Jersey thing.
That, by the way, that is not AICPA's program. That is one where, if you want to know the truth behind that program, the New Jersey board was having a discussion about, the 120, 150, like some other boards have had, just, usually a person. And we had a conversation with one of the advocates of that discussion, and he was sort of the genesis of coming up and developing the 150, or excuse me, the 120 program with the 30 additional hours through St. Peter's University there. And so it was a ground roots effort from the New Jersey board
Okay.
to get that actually implemented. So it's not an AICPA plan or a NASBA plan.
Okay. Well, they've added it to their plan. They've made it seem like it's part of their.
As I described it, we've added it as something for us to look at the success of that model,
right,
and how can we make it scalable and affordable.
Right. So here's the problem I see with it, as like why it won't work, as somebody who has, worked in public accounting, is that like one of the other barriers to attracting people into the profession is the hours. So what you're saying is, instead of people going and sitting in a classroom for a year, we're going to put them to work in firms, and they're going to have to work and they're going to have to earn the education at the same time. So like they're going to be really busy. They're going to be working long hours at the firm, and they're going to be spending a lot of time trying to pass these courses. So like, I don't see how that addresses the work-life balance issue in the accounting profession. It just exacerbates it even further.
Well, Blake, you talked earlier about all these 120 CPAs out there and how a great job they do, and they do. And many of them worked very hard when they were in college, when they were achieving that. I will tell you, the New Jersey plan and the ELE plan has the firm participating. PwC participates in encouraging and giving those people the time and leniency to do the programs they need to do. And that's what we're doing under ELE. So yeah, I agree with you, but it won't work if these people are so overworked they don't have time. Prior to computerized tests, when it was paper and pencil, almost all given twice a year in November, May and November, almost every firm gave their employees, study time off. They worked together as a group to pass the exam. And somehow during computerized examination, that just sort of went away. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Now that we're trying to go back to say, firms, you've got to invest in this too, in your employees, and give them the space, the opportunity, and the time to study and be prepared and to sit for the CPA exam in a timely way. So you're absolutely right. It's an issue, but we've got to resolve it.
Yeah. In general, I feel like the profession has made this, we've tied the CPA to a traditional education path, to college, to traditional education. And that has gotten more and more expensive over the last decades. It is one of the biggest expenses that you will ever make
But that's not unique to CPAs. I mean,
right. No, I agree.
I have a daughter that's a CPA, I have a daughter that's a teacher. The teacher to be tenured in California has to have a master's degree.
And we have a teacher crisis. We have a teacher shortage crisis.
It's tied to traditional education.
Right.
But name a profession that isn't.
Right. And I'm saying they're all.
We should let all professions be professionals without an education.
Well, I'd say that we change the education so that it's more flexible and not tied to these universities that are bloated, that are expensive, that are not providing the value anymore.
I'm probably not going to take this opportunity to be critical of our education system in the United States, but I'm not going to disagree with you either.
Other professions have done things to deal with their demand. I mean, decade ago, nurses were going to school for free. The hospitals were footing the bill to go back and become an RN, right? So the education, removing the barrier to getting the education, either the cost, the time to do it, et cetera, definitely impacts the supply. There's no doubt on this. And like, we're not just seeing levers pulled. There's no levers being pulled. Like this is going to be 40 years old next week.
We're having respectful conversation with education. Some colleges aren't very happy with the ELE, but we're proposing that they pay $150 an hour. But I just attended an international economic conference, and they did a study about the cost of everything over a period of time. And the most dramatic increase during this, of all the things, of food, of fuel, of cars, of electronics, of houses, the most significant increase was education, which during this period of time jumped like 250%. So we do know there's a correlated cost of education. Plus, students are getting smarter about not wanting to go deeply into debt, as far as student debt. So we hear you. We don't disagree with that. And that's one of the issues that we have to also have conversations about. So I'm not disagreeing with you on that, but I don't think getting rid of education is the answer.
I say I would change it to modify the education, right? We still want to have education, we want to have experience, we want to have a rigorous exam, those 3 points. But I don't think the universities, the traditional accredited universities, are doing a good job. I mean, there's no reason that we can't teach people to know what they need to know to pass the CPA exam in 3 years, like they do in other countries. Why does it take 5 years here? It just seems so inefficient. I mean, we've got some.
You have to be pretty careful, though. I mean, we have IQOB, where we do the determination of mutual recognition agreements of countries like in the UK and Ireland. And what I will tell you, they have competency-based education, where the United States has an hourly base. We're the only country on the planet that has an hourly based education system. So when you say 3 years, if you look at the educational experience in 3 years in the UK, it looks a lot different in the United States, but the amount of total education is really not that much difference. But it certainly has a cost component.
Yes.
And it is something that probably the future, I expect the United States is going to look more like a competency-based model than an hourly model. But right now we are pretty much with the hourly model, and we're trying to adapt to that.
Ken,
I don't disagree with you, though.
I know we're over on time. I want to know, do you have a few more minutes? We had 2 questions come in from our listeners.
I'll give you all the time you want. How about that?
Fantastic. So Mason said, this is a question. Why is there an assumption that you need a master's degree to be a CPA? I got my 150 in 4 years with no additional cost. Is my alma mater the only school that does this? What am I missing?
Well, to be clear, we don't believe that you have to have a master's degree. And let me tell you why. A lot of people that come into becoming CPAs are formerly lawyers, they're formerly teachers. And so they've had a 4-year degree in something else. So the additional time for them, maybe that's when they take on the back end the accounting courses. So
that was me.
150 hours. Yeah. So they come with 150 hours. And so they're as educated as a master's degree, but they weren't trying to seek. Where a MAC program, from the very beginning, you want to have a master's degree, but we're not asserting at all that someone needs to have a master's degree to be a CPA. A lot of the best CPAs that I know had an undergraduate degree in something else and topped off with their accounting courses to get to 150.
Oh, and I love this idea of switching from an hourly based system to a competency based system. I mean, isn't that what the exam is? The exam tests for competency, and the education. Yeah. And the way our education is set up, it just tests for, can you sit in a seat in a classroom and pass some tests,
Well, you know this already, Blake. The education system in the United States, even though it's hourly, it has already moved a lot towards competency-based. When you look at things like Western Governors Association, when you look at most candidates, they go to school and they don't take, or they get coursework for college and high school. They don't take English 1 and 2, but test advanced English, and they get 9 hours of credit. So it's competency-based. You got credit for a course because you had the competency to pass a test or to achieve the higher level course. So they end up with 150 hours, but they didn't spend 150 hours in a seat in a college. They achieved it through a different way. So you have to be careful when you say that the United States model doesn't have a lot of competency built into it, but it's not the way it's measured. And we still measure in hours. And so that's why our law is written the way it is.
But 20,000 students graduate from MAC programs every year, and those are typically people who went to a 4-year bachelor's degree and then did a 5th year MAC. And they're the ones who are spending the most money. Well,
it depends. It depends on the school. Some they obviously take their general courses, but then they get into accounting and move into the MAC program. Where I'm on the board at the Vanderbilt, almost all of our students who come there for the MAC program do not have an accounting degree in their undergraduate, like you described. So I'm certainly familiar with that model.
So Cody said, if a person with a 2-year associate's degree can pass the CPA exam, why would it matter that they didn't take 150 credit hours to get just as smart as somebody who took 5 years?
Well, yeah, I mean, we hear that argument a lot. Obviously, it's like like when a lot of states now let you sit for the exam at 120 instead of 150 as it originally came out. And some people say, if you can pass the exam at 120, then why can't you go ahead and be licensed?
Yeah.
And as I said, that's where That's where legislatures and with a lot of input from the profession and regulators a long time ago, 4 decades ago, said we need to continue to raise the bar. And so having the more well-rounded, like what you had, Blake, the philosophy, whatever it is, we believe makes you a better CPA in this world where many CPAs never touch like an audit. Many never touch tax. They do so many different things as CPAs anymore in the profession. So that well-rounded education wouldn't help to have additional technical accounting courses. The other work is what's important, but it has to be high value. I agree with that.
Yeah. And right now it can be anything.
Yeah. It's maybe the argument here is, should the 150, the mistake was 40 years ago, it never said you must get a Mac. And maybe that's the real problem. Because if I go, like, lawyers, you can't just go take other classes. You have to go to law school. If I want to be a doctor, I have to go do residencies. Like, this is just
Medical
so wishy-washy. Maybe that's the big flaw here.
Just so you know, and you probably already know this, but when this started out, that's what the desire was, is to have a master's degree. The problem was, unlike law schools and medical schools, there weren't any master's of accounting program or enough out there to handle the volume of CPAs that were needed. And there was a lot of resistance in state legislators from the four-year colleges. They didn't have a master's program and they didn't want to lose. So like any legislation, the people that are being hurt by it are there to testify against it. And so essentially, the argument was, okay, let's move away from the masters and go to 150. But it also served us well for the people who had, like you, Blake, had a different undergraduate degree who was able to then become a CPA with the top off versus the opposite way.
Yeah. I mean, for me, and this is something that we probably don't even have time to go into, but it's the impact on career changers of the 150. I think that the talent shortage is so dramatic in accounting that if we want to actually solve this thing, we need to get people coming in, more people from outside the profession who maybe they didn't make the wisest decision when they were in their undergraduate like me and they majored in music, but they're smart and they could be great accountants. For me, it was extremely difficult to become a CPA because I was working and I had to take all of these 30, credit hours. And I really did have to do the 30 because I didn't have a business undergraduate degree. I didn't have any of those accounting classes. So I had to work, I had to take these classes at night, and I had to study for the exam. And God help me if I'd actually been working at an accounting firm. Instead, I was freelancing so I could have that flexibility. But I don't know how anyone changes careers into accounting. It's very, very difficult. And we could make it so much easier if we dropped that requirement, if we allowed people to, take the exam and have the bachelor's degree and get some work experience. It would be much easier. I mean, just look at the.
First of all, Blake, I'm glad you became a CPA and told your story to do that. We see a lot of CPAs though, like you, who did change a career and come into it. But I will tell you that social media is so powerful. I mean, people that want to be CPAs or not, they can go out there and hear about salaries and workload and things like that. And we have work to do to get the salaries up, the work-life balance things, worked out, allowing people who are sitting for the CPA exam not to kill themselves working so that they can't get through the exam. We need the support of firms to do that. So we hear you on all of that. We probably got to where we are because there was such a surplus of candidates up until just a few years ago. We weren't focused on some of the stuff that we have to focus on now because of the challenges of the pipeline. So it's kind of new. We're working on it. And will we make some bad answers? We could, but I don't want anybody to think that NASBA or AICPA are working together UA, that anybody's resting on their laurels or does not agree we have a serious problem, because we know we have a serious problem that we have to resolve.
And the certification that I see succeeding is the Certified Management Accountant certification, right? They are growing leaps and bounds, surpassed 100,000, I think. And meanwhile, you see the number of CPAs declining. And what's the difference between the CMA and the CPA? It's that CMAs only need a bachelor's degree. They pass the exam and they get, I think it's 3 years of work experience. So it's a very simple, streamlined requirement without specific courses, without this 150-hour rule. And people are being drawn into that, right? Why can't we be like that? I mean, would anyone say that CMA has a lower bar than the CPA?
Oh, I would, absolutely.
Do you think CMAs are less qualified than CPAs?
To do audit work and the things that CPAs do, absolutely.
But you said only, most CPAs aren't doing audit these days, right? Only 15% of
So let's
CPAs
talk about
do
it.
audit.
So the interesting thing about the CPA profession is that when you become a CPA, you can, as they say, hang the shingle. It's like if you get past the law, you can practice accounting, public accounting, which means you're the only people in the United States who can sign a test and audit. So whether or not you do it, our job as regulators is to make sure that if you do it, you're qualified to do it at entry level, you maintain the competency to do it, and that you're peer reviewed, that other people agree that you can do it. So that's what I'm saying. No, absolutely, there's no comparison between the capability and even the allowance of what a CPA can do or a management accountant can do. And by the way, I'm not talking negatively about them. They do an important role and good friends over on that side, in the leadership of those organizations. So I'm not being critical of them. I'm saying there's a real difference.
Well, I'm a non-attest CPA, right? I was licensed in California and I didn't get the attest hours, so I can't sign an audit paper.
Well, as you know, California is the only state that has that. So I do know there are some unique
market.
By the way, we don't disagree with that two-tier. We've gotten away from the two-tier, and maybe it makes sense, but yeah, that's the only state where that exists.
At the end of the day, the market doesn't know nor care. Blake has a CPA. I forgot his name. He was at the CPA Educators Conference. He's leaving, but he's president of the State Society for Washington.
The CFO at the State Society in Washington.
He's like, I had a horrible GPA. I did 12 years of school. I failed out of one university, moved to the other university, but nobody cares because he has those 3 letters. Like, no, that's at the end of the day, all that really matters. And if that's what matters, and the test is the proof, because you're telling me, like, if I've heard this conversation correctly, Ken, the work experience they get is very variable. The education experience, obviously, we know is variable because you can do anything you want with those 30 hours. If the only thing that's concrete and black and white is the test, then that's the test.
That's the thing that really matters.
If you're LeBron James of accounting,
we don't agree with that premise. We do not agree that the exam is an entry level to determine entry level skills to get into the profession. That combined with your experience, which again, we lower the bar for the experience or requirement of experience and increase the education back when they did 150. But no, there's the CFO you're talking about. I can come up with stories on both sides of this argument, but I can tell you in the CPAs that I'm around on the NASBA board, of course, it's a very competitive process to get on the board. There are some of the senior leaders of the profession, both on our board and AICPA, and you, Blake, and to like other people that I've seen you interview. I mean, there are some really significant contributors to the accounting profession in different ways, like what you all do with this blog. I mean, it's a very important service that you provide to do this. And so I do think that CPAs bring something to the table. Again, I'm not one. I'm proud to have a daughter that is. My best friend's a CPA. But I as a consumer, back when I was a cop in my cop days, I paid a premium to have a CPA do the work that I had done because I knew that I was dealing with a premium accountant. And that's I think that's what most consumers want, believe, and expect out of CPAs.
Have you all polled CPAs to see what they think about this? Because, like David and I mentioned earlier, when we post about this on social media, the young CPAs are on social, 30 to 50-year-olds. I would say 1 in 100 people is in favor of this. It is really unpopular. So have you all?
Here's what I tell you. To answer your question is no. We have, but what we have is that we have all 55 U.S. jurisdictions. Almost all the board members are CPAs and some public members, and we have the executive directors and executive staffs across the country. We meet with the executive directors on a monthly basis and have a call where they discuss. We meet regularly through our regional representatives with all state boards. So we talk to people who are obviously somewhat biased because they're in the regulatory side of this. But we also meet regularly with the AICPA, which is the other side, the professional side. And so we do get an awful lot of input. I will tell you, I think I said it on the front end, there have always been those that have opposed the 150 from its genesis to now. and we've always listened to them, and we have thoughtful dialogue with societies, with state boards, with individuals. But the consensus in my world is support for substantial equivalency, mobility, thus the 150. And if we're going to come up with an alternative, it has to be universally adopted.
Yeah. And how many of these folks who are in your circle had to get the 150?
Well, a growing number, obviously, because as the baby boomers are retiring, we're seeing more and more people that had the 150. I don't know that I can give you a ratio, but I can also tell you that many of the people that I know that were CPAs prior to the 150, many of them had master's degrees and had, already MBAs and law degrees and other degrees in addition to accounting. So, there's also a large number of people that just got, the bachelor's degree, but also the very intense experience requirement pre-150.
Yeah. Well, David, I think I'll give you the last word on this, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I want to make sure I heard this correctly, because it's kind of making my head explode. Okay. Did
I
you
like
say
making people's head explode? So let's do this.
So did you say that all the CPA exam does is prove you're an entry level CPA?
Exactly.
So this is crazy. Like, that is insane to me. So the assumption is, as a consumer, if somebody has that, I assume they're just as good as anybody else that has that.
Well, you know me, David.
And that's the branding. That's the branding.
You know me, David. And so I passed the CPA exam, and with 1 year of experience, I was a CPA. Right.
But the branding is, it's all equal. That's why maybe you need CPA plus or whatever it might be, because if I go into a doctor's office and they have that certificate on the wall, they have those two letters, DR, you kind of trust in you're in good hands. But you're telling me that just because they got the CPA, yeah.
But if you go to the
that's the bare minimum. I cannot believe that's the view.
And years of experience before they can practice medicine.
Right. So we replaced, like, doctors have to do residencies. They do like what, 5-10 years of experience before they can practice. And in the CPA world, we have replaced the experience requirement with an education requirement, essentially. Like, 1 year of experience is hardly anything. And I just think that we need to go back to our roots. I mean, CPA used to be purely experience based, right? Exam experience. I mean, we can go back 100 years and it was, you learned on the job. And I feel like my feeling is that we have replaced that very valuable experience with education. And I'm not a big fan of classroom education, Ken. Like, I went to a top university. I went to Northwestern University, and I saw how you could game the system, right? Like, my degree at Northwestern has value because of the brand, not
Blake, you're a smart guy. You're going to game the system if you went to Harvard. I mean, so yeah. I mean, you're smart, and we're proud to have you as a CPA. But I'm not disagreeing with you about the value of good experience. I don't disagree with you on that. I would not be surprised if we have serious discussions about an alternative pathway that can that doesn't violate substantial equivalency mobility. Right now, we're in a, like I said, short term. What do we need to do right now? I don't think that having, legislation that isn't well thought out, believing, based on some people that education is the whole problem, we could actually do more harm than good if we don't slow walk this and do it right. So I don't think you all said anything in your past that I've heard you say in the past. You all make good sense. I mean, there are some valid arguments out there that we need to listen to and consider change. I don't want anyone to believe that anyone I know at AICPA or NASBA has a stake in the ground that says we're never going to change, that the education in the future is going to look just like it does now. Because I don't think that's the case. I think that right now we're really trying to protect for consumers and the profession, substantial equivalency mobility, and what can we do to slow walk this and fix it, but also fast walk it enough that we can get people in the pipeline on the short term as quickly as possible.
I think that's a great way to end this episode. Thank you so much, Ken. We've been talking with Ken Bishop, President and CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right.
Thanks,
bye, everyone.